All right, in the studios, we're still with the Cabinet Secretary for National Treasury and Economic Planning, John MBADI. We had started talking about the situation that the government now intends to sell part of its shares within SAFARICOM, which is 15% of the shareholding in that institution. Let's first take a look at some of the numbers that we have looking at the current ownership before that transaction succeeds. We are talking about the government of Kenya owning 35% of the stake in SAFARICOM. Vodafone Group has 39.93, almost 40% of the stake there. There are institutions that own up to 0.83% and others, including Kenyan citizens who invested in the initial public offering of SAFARICOM way back at 24.23%. Now, should this transaction succeed, this is what is going to happen. Vodafone Group is going to control a stake of 55%, up from just below 40%. The government of Kenya's stake will reduce from 35% to 20%, and the general public will keep its 25%, which is inclusive of individuals and institutions. Now, the government of Kenya is selling the 6 billion shares. Of course, it's 6 billion and 9.8 million shares, which is equivalent to 15% stake within SAFARICOM. Let's just take a look at what that would mean in terms of dividends. At the moment, the financial year ending March 2025, SAFARICOM declared a full-year dividend of 1.2 shillings, that is 1 shilling 20 cents per share. At the time, the government shares was about 14 billion and 22 million. And therefore, if you have to calculate that 1.2 times the number of shares, you get to the dividends accruing to the government to about 16.8%. Of course, that is before tax. Then, if you have to look at once the government of Kenya divests from SAFARICOM up to 15% of that stake, then you'll find that if you sell the 6 billion shares, the estimated dividends that would have accrued to those shares is about 7.2 billion, using the figure of 1 shilling 20 cents of the full-year dividends declared by SAFARICOM. The government's residual stake, based on that calculation, is about 8.01 billion shares, which is equivalent to 20%. And the estimated dividends accruing to that is 9.6%. And if the sold rights are fetching 40.2 billion shillings, if you had to use the same rate that was 1 shilling 20 cents for SAFARICOM dividends, then you're talking about 4.2 years is what the government would take to earn that with a stake of 20%. Let's just take a look at how else the chain of ownership occurs within SAFARICOM. So Vodacom Group Limited, which is a multinational, owns, as soon as that transaction is completed, will own 100% of Vodafone Kenya, and therefore the same will own SAFARICOM Limited up to 55%. And Waziri, if you're to look at that reality, that means that at least at the point of starting, 55% of that company is owned by foreigners or foreign investors. How does that do to the national psyche of people that have been saying, we have this stake here? How do you calm the nerves of those that are saying, how do you sell off a company fetching you up to 18 billion shillings per year?
Yeah, first of all, I want to make it very clear that what we are doing is what we call unlocking value for a mature investment. Mm-hmm. The SAFARICOM PLC, as an investment for the Republic of Kenya, as it is today, is a mature investment. And that is what you can unlock. You can unlock the value and invest it in other productive ventures. And I will tell you for a fact, Sam, that this probably the right time to divest, because again, this company is surviving on technology. And digital technology advances and changes. Where we are is the 5G and of course the fiber. The next stage is for fintech and expansion in the region. You need to free and unlock government investment in this company to be able to advance. But again, something else is that I don't know how much time this would take, but I will tell you for a fact that for us to be able to continue doing infrastructure projects in this country, you need to have capital. You need to have resources to do it. And presently, you can do it in two ways. One is taxation, the other one is debt. Now, taxation, putting more or hiking taxes is not an option.
Right.
going to more debt is not an option. Yet we have huge investment projects that we need to put money in to be able to realize economic growth that would create job opportunities to our country.
Right.
Now, you need to have more creative ways of raising funds, and this is one of them. Now, the other thing that I would also mention, it is not that the government of Kenya will now forgo the 16 or 18 billion. Mm-hmm. We will still get almost about 10 billion every year if we continue with the current rates of performance or dividend or profitability of Safaricom PLC. Mm-hmm. What you forgo is probably about 7 billion per year, mm-hmm. which if we were to reason that way in straight line, we are receiving 200 billion today. How long will you receive that money at 7 billion shillings? If we were to take that simplistic arithmetic, it's about 30 years. Mm-hmm. Now, depending on where you invest this money, because I think the fear maybe Kenyans have here is that we are divesting in Safaricom 15%, getting this money and consuming it or putting it in budgetary support. Yep. That is not what we intend to do. What we intend to do is to productively use the resources that we are going to raise by divesting 15% in Safaricom and any other privatization, put it in a national infrastructure fund, mm-hmm. which then we would use to link the private sector and institutional investors with public investment or public infrastructure. Sam, let me ask you this question. Kenya is growing its economy now, or the economy is growing at 5%. Analysis and studies have shown that for Kenya to create employment opportunities that would match the number of the youth who come out of colleges to join the labor market, we need at least 7% mm-hmm. economic growth. Yep. How are we going to realize economic growth without further investment in infrastructure projects like roads? Today, our major trading partner is Uganda. Right. To reach Uganda is a nightmare. It is affecting our economy in that respect. Mm. The other neighbor is Tanzania, which is our trading partner. How do you reach Tanzania when the road from Nairobi to Namanga is a challenge? We have the issues of food security, and we need to depend now on irrigated agriculture as opposed to rain-fed agriculture, which is proving unreliable. Many people will tell you, and studies have shown, that direct foreign investment in this country cannot be realized easily because of the cost of energy arising out of reliability and cost. Now, we need to put more resources to energy generation, electricity energy generation, and transmission. Right. Where will you get resources when now you cannot raise more resources from taxes because Kenyans are complaining of higher taxes, and they're right to complain. Where will you get resources when you don't have fiscal space in your budget? The debt level is unsustainable. Okay. You must be more creative. Look at those public investment infrastructure projects, which are commercially viable, mm-hmm. which you can now have seed capital and attract private investment, blend the resources. That is what we call blending of capital.
Right. And Waziri, we'll be talking about that because, of course, we had the president saying during the State of the Nation address about the two funds, the two critical funds, that is the National Sovereign Wealth Fund and also the National Infrastructure Fund that is supposed to be created. But I also want us to talk a little bit about the process that has been followed, because in that communication that came from Safaricom, the public announcement, it talks about completion of the transaction is subject to approval from certain government and regulatory authorities in Kenya, including the cabinet, the Kenyan Cabinet, Kenyan National Assembly, Capital Markets Authority, Communications Authority of Kenya, Central Bank of Kenya, COMESA Competition Commission, and the East African Community Competition Authority. Mm-hmm. If this is the case, at this point, has the Kenyan Cabinet applied its mind on this transaction?
Thank you, Sam. And you know, that is why I think sometimes we rush into conclusions. Actually, this process will take 4 stages. Yeah. The first stage is proposal initiation. Mm-hmm. The next stage is approval by National Assembly and the Cabinet. And then there is the National Assembly, sorry to speak. And then there is the execution, and then finally proceeds and reporting. Now, where we are is the initial stage of proposal initiation.
Yes.
What the government has done is to announce that this is what we intend to do in the spirit of accountability and transparency. we are communicating to Kenyans and telling them this is the intention, this is the negotiation that we have done. Now, the cabinet has already engaged its mind on this matter.
Okay.
So from here, already I am communicating to the National Assembly. And this is now going to kick off the process of public participation and engagement with people's representatives. You know, when you listen to comments, especially from Ndindi Nyoro and being a member of parliament, he's talking like we have concluded this process. This process is just beginning. This is what we call proposal initiation.
Yes.
What we have done is to be transparent, and I don't know why we should be condemned for being transparent. Previously, there were complaints that we first complete transactions is when we come and explain to Kenyans. Now we are starting, and we are telling them this is the discussion that we have had, this is what is intended to be done. So the process then moves to the National Assembly.
Right.
And from the National Assembly, there will be other regulatory bodies like CMA is coming in, because for block sales, the CMA, the Capital Markets Authority, must give prior approval. So that process is going to take place. CBK will be involved, Competition Authority will be involved, all these bodies that are involved by law. And we are going to apply Section 87A of the Public Finance Management Act and the Privatization Act, which has just been passed. All these processes will kick in. And then the next step will now be the execution. The execution will also be another step, where again there will be valuation done. Again, even though we have already negotiated and discussed and agreed on the valuation, there will be another valuation done at that
And therefore the question, because if you look at this statement from Safaricom and from yourselves, it's very detailed and almost, it shows a very extensive thinking that has gone into it.
Yeah.
What is the role of Parliament, for instance? What would it take Parliament?
What it would take Parliament is now, as people's representative, to give approval, because that is what the legal framework demands. Yep. And it will take Parliament now to conduct public participation as people's representative. Public participation is not in the Privatization Act, but it is inferred, because the Constitution demands for public participation. And even in Public Finance Management Act, it calls for public participation. So public participation will be done at this stage. Yep. And Kenyans may come forward and say, we don't want the shares to be offloaded, some people, to be divested. Some people will support it. So based on that, the National Assembly will input. The law is not clear whether National Assembly can amend or adjust, but they can propose changes because it is silent. Yeah. So those are some of the things that will be discussed.
What if Parliament says no?
If Parliament fails to approve, then the whole process stops. It's frustrated.
Would that have an impact on the stability of Safaricom, including share
I don't think so, but that, Safaricom is listed in the Nairobi Securities Exchange. Yep. And so if the transaction does not fall through, we will revert back to status quo. So I don't see how it can affect the value of Safaricom or its operations in any way.
Okay.
But I was just saying that then we move to the execution stage, which is the execution stage will now lead to concluding the transaction, and then the proceeds now comes to the consolidated fund. But we will take it now to the special fund, that is the National Infrastructure Fund, and part of it will go to the sovereign.
When do you expect this transaction to conclude to the extent that you now receive the proceeds?
There are no timelines in the law, although you can expedite. So that is why I was calling upon the National Assembly to expedite the process so that we move forward, so that Kenyans can gain value out of this transaction, because I believe there is going to be value out of it. But and if you allow me to...
You must be working with some targets.
Well, we are thinking of like 90 days for... You see, Parliament will have like 7 to 21 days for the committee of the House, the two committees to deal with the public participation and all the rest.
Which are those committees?
The two committees are the Finance Committee of the National Assembly and the Privatization Committee. There are two committees.
Nothing for Public Investments Committee?
No, sorry, the Public Privatization Committee. Public Investment Committees are dealing with, those are morticians. They deal with things that have already been concluded. Those are
audit reports.
Yeah, those are audit committees. Okay. So it is the two committees. It's the Finance Committee and the Privatization Committee.
If you talk about 90 days, is it realistic? Parliament is on recess starting tonight. They come back on 9th
What
of February.
we are saying is once the process starts,
Yeah.
the turnaround should be around 90 days. I'm not explicit because the timings are not in the law.
Yeah.
And again, you can't dictate to Parliament how to transact its business. We can only plead with Parliament and appeal to them to fast track and expedite. I believe the Parliament, when it resumes, and maybe the committee may start dealing with this matter even when they are on recess, and then when Parliament resumes, the matter is debated in Parliament and concluded. Okay. Then we start now the process of execution, which will again take some time. Okay. After which, then now we will get the proceeds. Fortunately, you know, if it goes the way we have planned the transaction, yep, and Vodacom gets opportunity to conclude with us this transaction, then Vodacom is a reputable company with the financial strength to make payment. Okay. It will not end like some other transactions which have ended where you now conclude and then the company does not have the money.
Now, as you say that, you're also hoping that Sovereign Wealth Fund and the National Infrastructure Fund are completed. First, when I look at the Sovereign Wealth Fund, the draft itself, it has no place of how it would receive proceeds from Safaricom or divestiture in Safaricom, because the divestiture they talk about is investments of the government of Kenya in natural resources or petroleum. How do you then go ahead with the transaction, hoping that it's going to feed into a fund which is not even created, and even the draft does not provide for it?
Yes, we are hoping and expecting the Sovereign Wealth Fund to be, the debate and the bill to be processed quickly. I know now the draft is with the Attorney General, and they're working around it, and it will go to Parliament. Sovereign Wealth Fund, if you look at it, the architect of it was more leaning towards the minerals and petroleum products. Yep. That was in anticipation that Kenya was going to get or to heat oil and the rest. But we are proposing amendment to the law to allow for about 10% of the proceeds of privatization also to go to the Sovereign Wealth Fund. Why? Because there is what we call intergenerational equity. Okay. The future generation should get a portion of what we have today. Yeah. And so the thinking of the government is that we should allow a small percentage to go to the Sovereign Wealth Fund for intergenerational wealth and for intergenerational equity. But the bulk of it will go to the National Infrastructure Fund, which fund will create assets for the future. So actually this is outward looking. It's not created yet. The National Infrastructure Fund. No, the National Infrastructure Fund, the discussion, there is the feeling that we really don't have to have law as in an act to create a National Infrastructure Fund. You can create it through regulations, and we can budget through the budgetary process, because funds can be created by the National Assembly. Okay. So we are working on the details of that. And by the way, this process is not going to be concluded in 2 months, 3 months. It will take a while. Okay. Before that happens, we will have had in place a National Infrastructure Fund. We'll talk about that and more later on the conversation with the Cabinet Secretary, National Treasury, John MBADI. He's here to answer all your questions that you may have. You can start to send them in via 22422, that is the SMS line, or you can write to us on X at Sam Gituku at Citizen TV Kenya. The hashtag to use is Tonight. We're back in a moment.